Srabani Sen. Very excited to be interviewing you today. Founder of Full Colour, set up 18 months ago, I believe. I'd like to kick off by asking you, what was the seed of the idea for setting up that business?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on your podcast. It's really exciting to be chatting to you. So the seeds of the idea for Full Colour came when I was already doing quite a lot of consultancy around strategy and board governance and so on. But I was just getting a bit bored, and I was thinking, what do I really want to do with my life? Where do I want to put my energy? And I started reflecting on my own journey. So I'd had quite a long leadership career. I'd done a number of CEO roles, about 25, 30 years of being on boards, about 4 chair roles. I was thinking, what is it that I really love to do? And I realised that in rising through the ranks into those leadership roles, the higher up the ranking I got, or the higher up the hierarchy I got, the less I saw people who looked like me. And when I started in my career, lots of people who looked like me, certainly in more junior roles, very, very diverse. And I started thinking, why? Because I'm of that generation where equal opportunities was the big thing. And when I started reflecting, I realised that actually it's because a lot of those things just didn't work. And when I looked out into the world of consultancy around diversity and inclusion, I realised what a lot of people were offering were what I describe as micro solutions. So they'll come in and they'll help you think about your policies and how you do recruitment and stuff like that. All really valuable stuff. But there was nobody who had really that kind of unique set of things that I could bring into a space around equality, diversity and inclusion. And that was a combination of lived experience of doing the day job of being a leader and driving change in an organisation and really dealing with some knotty stuff, combined with lived experience of being from a minoritised group, combined with lived a knowledge around issues around equality, diversity and inclusion. So I saw this enormous gaping hole in the market, if I can call it that, in the solutions that were being provided, and I just felt I could probably fit it. And that's why I set up Full Colour. It was to really work in a very strategic way around creating change on equality, diversity and inclusion.
That's really interesting. And what I heard in that was that you looked at what is it that you love doing and clearly what you're good at doing. And I think that's always a success formula for setting up a business, to combine those two things. So you referred to many roles and senior roles that you've held over the years, a couple of decades, I imagine. So what are the challenges that you've faced in those leadership roles, and how have you approached them? How do you bring your personality to leadership?
Well, actually, that's an interesting framing of the question just there. How do you bring your personality to leadership? When we get into what I think leadership is, we might kind of debate that a little bit. So in terms of the challenges I've faced as a leader, I think I could break that down into sort of 2 chunks. So as a leader, you face challenges because your organisation is facing challenges. So in that context, I've probably faced every challenge that every other executive and board leader has ever faced ever, because that's just the nature of leadership, right? So whether that's to do with having to managing downsizing organisations, or dealing with kind of big crises in organisations, or just changing organisations, repurposing them so that we're innovating, all the sorts of things that every leader faces, I've faced, because that's what leaders face. I think that probably what's at the core of your question is more to do with personal challenges I've faced in being a leader. And I think those challenges you could probably categorise in 2 ways. One is other people's expectations of me as a leader, and one is all the kind of insecurities that I bring as a human to leadership roles. And the intersection of those 2 things, I think, is where the tough stuff lies. absolutely, without doubt. And as you pointed out, I've been kind of doing leadership roles for a couple of decades now. And certainly if you look at leadership and what leadership looked like 20 odd years ago, it was largely white and it was largely male. And so I was very visible as a leader because I wasn't either of those things. And I think I was very mindful of the fact that people had far higher expectations of me as a leader. The standards to which I was held was much, much higher than the standard of the white male leaders around me at the time. How many people do you know who were white men or are white men and are actually really pretty poor leaders? But that doesn't lead people to say, oh gosh, white men, aren't they rubbish at leadership? But if you are in any way, shape or form different, sometimes your strengths and your weaknesses get associated with your identity unfairly. And so I was very mindful that people had much, much higher expectations. I had far less room to make mistakes than my peers in leadership positions. And that's hard. And I think when you combine that with your view of yourself, which is usually riddled with imposter syndrome and insecurities, the combination of the two is quite tricky. And I think that what that leads to is much, much higher levels of pressure. You experience much higher levels of stress and pressure as you navigate both of those things, other people's expectations of you and your own expectations of yourself combined with your own insecurities about yourself. And I think how I handled that was not always well. Often that led to things like, and still does, I still struggle with this, like absolutely extreme levels of workaholism in an attempt that if only I just worked that bit harder, I could probably get that bit better. So I think there are kind of negative ways that impacts, but also very early on when I was on the route to leadership, I realised that I could actually make my difference an advantage. So I found lots of different ways to work out how to apply that difference to the advantage of the organisations that I led, and in a way that shored up my ability to be a leader. And some of that could be quite simple stuff, and if you're interested I could share with that what some of those things are. Some of them are more profound, but I think that was how I approached that. So I don't know whether that's answered your question.
Oh, that's actually brought up lots more questions for me. I think having a deep and profound understanding of one's own approach to work, and so imposter syndrome you've mentioned, and I long for the day where that's not something that afflicts particularly women, I think, in the workplace. I found with age that's softened a little, and in fact some toilet graffiti I once saw on the back of a door in the last year that just said, "I am enough." I just thought, yes, hallelujah, I am enough. And so having that kind of understanding, I'm sure you bring a great deal of empathy to the workforces that you work with. And so, yes, my next question really is about what does good look like? If you've had the opportunity to consult, and I know it's early days with full colour, but can you paint a picture of what good would look like after you've made some interventions?
Well, it's really, again, some really interesting assumptions you're making in the question and how you frame the question. And I think one of the things, and we may get on to talk about this later, is a lot of people think about issues around equality, diversity and inclusion being personal issues. They're actually not. They're strategic, systemic issues. And I think where things go wrong is where people apply the personal to the systemic, and therein lies the reason why we've not moved forward in the 35 years that I've been in working life. So in terms of what good looks like, it depends how you're thinking about this. I know in thinking about this question, you were suggesting that we reflect on, when I've left an organisation, what have I left them with, which feels like it's right. I think there are various things that I would have left them with. And although it's been running 18 months, just shy of 2 years to be fair, Actually, I've worked with a number of clients. I've worked with, you know, really big household name clients who your listeners and viewers will recognise, done sector-wide projects. So at the moment I'm doing a big project around the whole environment NGO sector to create change around EDI. So I've got quite a lot of experience around what good looks like in terms of the legacy you leave clients with. I think the first legacy you leave, or we've left with the clients that we work with, is clarity. I have never known a topic area or a sector area where there is so much wool. I mean, the amount of woolly thinking that goes on around EDI is just mind-blowing to me. I mean, you would never get away with that amount of woolly thinking if you were thinking about financial stuff or governance stuff or strategy stuff or change management. You just wouldn't. So I think that one of the things that we leave organisations with is a much greater sense of clarity. Clarity of what it is they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, why it matters, all of those things. The other thing that we leave clients with, depending on what we do, so at Full Colour we do a range of things. We might just come in and do a big piece of diagnostic around the issues to do with equality, diversity and inclusion as it affects that organisation, because no two organisations are the same in any way. Why would they be the same around EDI? They just wouldn't. So getting some real clarity for people. I think the other thing we do is we have a very particular way of working. And our way of working, because we're very mission driven, is I'm not in it to get repeat business. I'm not in it to think, oh, how can I hook this client? I've won this client now, how can I hang on to them? That old traditional way of building your business is you hang on to the 80% of clients and you only put 20% of effort into finding new clients. That's not what we do. We do literally the opposite. And as part of that, therefore, some of the legacy that we're leaving is capability and confidence to travel that journey themselves. I think that's really, really crucial. And I think the other thing that we do is often when we come in and start working with organisations, it's literally happened this time last week. I was running an away day for a new client who was just beginning to think about planning their journey forward. And at the end of the day, the chief executive paused for a minute and said, gosh, you know, when we appointed you, I thought we knew what it was that equality, diversity and inclusion was and what it meant to us. I've realised we haven't got a clue as an organisation, and actually our starting point needs to be finding that way forward. And I think one of the things that was holding them back, and they've been doing lots of work, and this is really common across a lot of our clients, is they think they're doing a lot of work to move forward. But if you were to say the words equality, diversity and inclusion, the pictures which would come up in the heads of the different individuals working on this were completely different. And so without realizing that they were all pulling in different directions, thinking that what they were trying to do was move forward together. And so one of the things that we do at Full Colour is work really hard so that at least by the time we've left, everyone is on the same page. They understand what the words mean. Most people don't. They understand what it is they're trying to achieve in a unified, shared way, and they understand that journey of change that they're going to move on together, so that they're genuinely pooling their efforts to move together in a unified way. So hopefully that's what we leave clients with. That's the feedback that we get. And just this is a really weird kind of ancillary thing that we leave them with. A lot of people, so I come in as, and I have a team now, so there's a team of 6 of us that work as part of Full Colour. They also just adopt our ways of being and working. And a number of clients have said, the way you worked with us on this project, we've now actually stolen that, and we're actually changing the way that we work as teams, we're changing the way we're doing innovation, we're changing the way we're arriving at decisions. That's the real legacy, because actually you're helping to make those organisations effective, not just on the narrow topic of EDI, but in terms of who they are as an organisation and how they work.
I really love that. I love particularly the question, the thought that when you say EDI to people within an organisation, then lots of different visuals come up for them. I think that's a really smart place to start and end a project, perhaps within an organisation. So yeah, a great takeout from that, and really understanding that communication is very much two-way. You can train and educate people, but they have to be able to play back to you what their understanding is, and to get that unified with an approach to EDI. I think you obviously have great skills in that department. Coming now to the last 2 years in particular around the with COVID and pandemic, do you think some organisations' agendas on EDI have stalled, perhaps work that they were planning to do? Do you think that's been sidelined, put in the lay-by, or do you think people have pressed on and realising the importance of it?
I can only go by full colour. And I would say this time, literally this time last year, so a year ago, 12 months ago, full colour was me and a laptop. I now have a team of 6 people working on multiple projects in multiple sectors, on enormous projects, and have got to the point where we're actually turning down some really major opportunities because we literally do not have the capacity to take them on. So what we see at Full Colour is growth and growth of opportunity. So in other words, more and more organisations taking EDI seriously, and certainly part of some of the networks I'm part of informally, more and more organisations are really grappling with these issues. So I don't see stalling, I see growth. I think what's happened is the nature of the world in which people are doing EDI work has changed quite dramatically in the last 18 months, 2 years. And some people often, in a quite cliched way now, sadly, talk about the death of George Floyd and watershed moment, and people, which is true for a lot of organisations. But what I see has happened is 2 things. One is people who are not from a minoritized group becoming paralysed by their own fear of getting it wrong, and therefore atrophying in their attempts to actually move forward and tying themselves in knots in ways which are not helpful to anyone, including themselves. But what I also see is much higher levels of expectation from their staff and employees, particularly the younger generation, and much more impatience to achieve change. So if you're from my generation, I'm now in my 50s, you just realise that was the way it was, and you found a way to navigate your way through. You worked your socks off and pushed through. You just pushed through because you realised that was what it was. So you just realised, you worked out what you wanted to do and you went for it. I think that expectation of that additional burden of hard work, which my generation was brought up to expect to do, that a lot of those expectations are changing, and people saying, well, why should I have to work twice as hard? Why does it matter that I'm gay or brown or whatever it is, whatever it is that makes them different? So I think the context in which EDI work is happening is very, very different. And I think people are beginning to wake up to the complexity of what EDI work involves. One of my mantras, I often get, tenders will come into your inbox, people asking you to tender for work. And as eggs is eggs, 95 to 100% of those tenders are about, we really need to address the policies and procedures of this organisation to move forward. When have policies and procedures ever changed anything? Policies and procedures do not achieve change, people achieve change. And I think one of the things that people are a bit more willing, or maybe it's just the clients that we choose to work with, because we're in a very advantageous position now that we can choose to work with who we want to work with. We don't have to work with everyone that wants to work with us. And we really only choose to work with those organisations where they get that what it's about is about people, it's about culture, it's about mindset, it's about behaviour. And if you genuinely want to achieve change on EDI, that's where you've got to start. And that's what you've got to work out how to change. And I guess that's also, speaks to our specialisms around how we're able to help people. So I don't think it's as binary as your question suggests. I think it's far more complex than that. I think the nature of the work has changed, but certainly demand has not dropped in any way, shape or form. It is constantly increasing.
Thank you. I think fear and atrophy are interesting words, and perhaps when a leadership team are feeling those things, they might feel some safety and security in policies and processes, because that's literally black and white on paper and they can distribute that. So actually getting into the tangleweed of emotions, behavior change, culture, obviously bigger mountains to climb. So yeah, I really like those images you've conjured up there. And you've described woolly thinking that takes place, and perhaps tick box exercises. Any other common pitfalls that organisations trip themselves up with, would you say, that you've come across?
I think before I answer the common pitfall question, I think there's something that it might help viewers, listeners to understand, which is about the approach that Full Colour takes to our work around equality, diversity and inclusion. So there are various things which are quite particular about how we work. The first is we will only work at that strategic systemic level, and where that intersects with culture and behaviour is quite critical. I think the other thing that we're always insistent on, and we won't work with organisations that don't make this possible, is somebody in the C-suite team has to be part of the project team that we work in collaboration with in order to drive change. And that links to one of the common mistakes people make, is that they delegate it down to if they're lucky enough to have an EDI officer who has no power, no budget, no decision making, no kind of influence on the organisation. Yeah, go and sort out this big systemic problem that we've got in the organisation around EDI, like that's going to happen. So we are really insistent that we will only work with organisations that will commit a C-suite colleague to working with us. But as part of that, one of the things that we do is we're really, really clear that it is not possible to move forward and create real change around topics to do with equality, diversity and inclusion unless everybody feels psychologically safe. So we build psychological safety very actively into the planning of projects that we do with organisations. And one of the things that we always say to people is we can only work with you as a partner. You can't commission us to go away into a bubble and create EDI for you. We have to work in partnership with you. And that approach, another one of my kind of mantras, or one of my mantras is, you're the experts in you, we're the experts in EDI. We have to work collaboratively to work out how to move you forward. We can't do that for you. You have to kind of be part of that journey. And I think those things are really quite important, because the most important thing that we do from day one is develop relationships of trust so that everybody can feel safe in that journey and nobody will feel judged. We don't blame anyone because they might have used the wrong word or something. We might gently suggest they use a different word, but there has to be a no blame approach. So I think it's important to say that, because that influences what I'm about to share with you about what some of the most common mistakes are that organisations make around equality, diversity and inclusion. I think the first mistake that people make is they assume that the images in their head about what the words equality, diversity, inclusion mean are the same images as are in the heads of other people around them. If I were to say the word blue, I strongly suspect that the image that would come into people's heads who are listening to this podcast some people would think of sky blue, some people would think of navy blue, some people would think of baby blue, some people would think of turquoise, but everyone thinks when I say blue that we all mean the same thing. So I think one of the most common mistakes I see is, and in fact I very rarely come across an organisation that has articulated definitions of those words, and I don't think I've come across any organisation that, until we've worked with them, that has articulated definitions of the words that connect with why that organisation exists in the first place. So how it connects to that organisation's purpose, its mission, and so on. So not having clear definitions of the words, and sometimes I'll say to a client, look, you know, we can't really do the work that you've asked us to until you've got those definitions in place. Oh God, it can't be that hard. No, do we really? No. Yes, you do. And through the process of defining those words, they actually begin to understand the depth of what working on EDI involves. So that process of coming up with definitions is almost as important, and the conversations that happen around it are as important as having a set of words on a page. I think the other most common mistake I see is what I describe as a throw mud at a wall approach to EDI. Oh, my mate Fred in his organisation tried this. Maybe we should try that. Your mate Fred's organisation's context might be completely different from your organisation. And what I find is people sit down with no expertise, no knowledge of EDI, no training in EDI, no kind of any kind of expertise in EDI, come together and brainstorm, oh, well, let's try a whole load of stuff, not connected to a planned journey of change. EDI is no different from any other change management journey that you have. You have to have a planned journey of change. We need to achieve this, then achieve that, then achieve this, work that out first, and then say, well, okay, to achieve this and then achieve that, what actions do we need to do? What they start with is what actions do we need to do? So they're not connected to any journey of change. That is literally probably the second most common, if not equally as common as people not knowing what the words mean. The other mistake I see a lot is people's ambitions around EDI joyfully are enormous. They're like that big. Huge ambitions. Their resources are this big, teeny, 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 tiny. If you can think, if you were, I don't know, developing a new IT infrastructure for your organisation, you might start with enormous ambitions, but what you would then do is say, yeah, okay, fair enough, but we've only got this amount of money, so let's craft our ambitions around our new IT infrastructure around what we can afford. EDI is no different. And what I always say to clients is, if you have £2.50 to spend on this, that is absolutely fine. Craft what you're aiming to achieve around what can be achieved on £2.50. And the £2.50 doesn't just relate to what you spend on an external agency. To make real change around EDI requires input of staff time, input of thinking time. There will be a lot of time you have to put as an organisation into planning and developing that journey. So be really realistic about how much time and effort you're able to put in. And then actually what you'll do is, even if you move forward an inch, the fact you will actually move forward. And what I find is a lot of people put a lot of effort in and don't move forward because they haven't taken those steps and they're not been really realistic. And I think there's the other thing I make, the two common mistakes I see is there's a kind of an expression, if wishes were fishes, we'd all swim in riches. And there's a sort of sense that if you want to be more equal, diverse and inclusive, simply wanting it, suddenly it will happen. No. It doesn't work like that. Just having ambition around it, you actually need to take action, hence the need for the planned journey of change. And then the final two things I would say is any change journey has to be led from the top. Because the people at the top of the organisation, it's not that they're more skilled or they've got more to add to it, it's just because they've got a bigger view of the organisation and they can see what all the intersecting issues are far more than if you're in a more junior position and you can't see the range of things that organisation is dealing with, and therefore how EDI needs to be woven into it. So it absolutely has to have that. And then the very final mistake, I could literally do 3 hours just on the mistakes people make, but the last one I'll stop on is the world and their uncle are asking the wrong question around EDI. So the most common question and the most common problem that organisations come to us with, and I'm sure come to other agencies with, is how can we become more diverse? How can we find more diverse people? How can we make our board more diverse? How can we make our staff team more diverse? It's the wrong question. The question is, what is it about your organisation that is putting diverse people off from wanting to be part of you? And if you're starting with the wrong question, you find the wrong answers. So if your question is, how do we become more diverse? The conversation then becomes about, where do we put our job ads? Where are those networks that we can reach out to find more diverse people? They won't join you if you're not an inclusive organisation, a genuinely inclusive organisation. And I know we've not had a chance to talk about what Full Colour understands the definitions of those words to be, because they're usually not what people think they are. But if you're a genuinely inclusive organisation, which is way beyond, oh, we're lovely and welcoming, oh, we value you, that's not inclusion. But you really need to be asking the right questions. So I will stop there, because honestly, I could go on for hours on this topic alone.
Well, I've noted down, I think, 7 common pitfalls. So if I can whistle through them: wrong assumptions, not planning the journey, huge ambition, not putting a correct or appropriate resource towards it. If you want it, you actually have to take action, not just have that dream. Make sure there's inclusion and leadership from the top, and make sure you're asking the right question: why on earth aren't we diverse? Not what do we do to become diverse? So I hope I've paraphrased some of those, but yeah, fantastic wealth of food for thought there. I think one that sticks out for me is definitely having C-suite buy-in. So what advice would you give? I'm hoping HRDs listen to this and think, okay, we know we've got a problem around here. Perhaps Full Colour could be the answer to all our dreams, but they need to get C-suite buy-in. Aside from them watching this podcast series, what else could they do? How can they show to C-suite the value of either working with someone like Full Colour, or doing more work on EDI?
So there's a quick answer, which is go onto my website, because on my website there is an influence mapper tool, and it kind of takes people through a process. You don't have to pay for it, so you can just download it and use it. It takes people through a process of really thinking about how you get the people that you need to get on board, a process for thinking about how you do it. So I think that's one thing I would say. I think the complicated answer to that question is, it depends. And it depends on a range of things. It depends on what the context of your organisation is generally. Forget EDI for a minute. What is your organisation? What's the working world in which your organisation is part? What's the kind of sector of which you're part, and so on? And how does EDI sit within the context of that sector? Because if you can understand that, if it's like a really high priority for your sector for whatever reason, maybe you've had scandals in your sector, or I know you've got a particularly strong driving force in your sector, the answer to how you get your C-suite buy-in is going to be very different from if you're in a sector where nobody really cares. So it depends on your sector. It depends on what's going on in your organisation. What is the organisational imperative to embrace EDI? And that will be different from organisation to organisation to organisation. It will also depend on the mindset of your leaders. Again, it will differ from organisation to organisation. And there is something about really understanding what's in it for your leaders personally, as in literally them as humans. What's in it for them? Is it going to help them with their career trajectory? Is it going to make them feel like a good human? What is in it for your leaders? What is the benefits to them in terms of how they can lead your organization? Where are the wins? Where are the gains? So if your organization has a particular challenge with your talent pipeline, how does that literally affect those C-suite leaders, and how can you convey it in a way that affects those C-suite leaders? And what I'm saying will be absolute anathema to activists on the EDI world. And I totally understand why, because most activists would say, well, you should do it because it's the right thing to do. How many of us do things because it's the right thing to do? I reckon I'm about 2 stone overweight. I know what I'm supposed to do. Do I do it? No, because the call of the white chocolate Kit Kat bar in my fridge is much louder than the call of my knowledge in my head saying, for the love of Mike, lose 2 stone. We don't do things as humans because they're the right thing to do. We take the least path of resistance. Also, it's really scary for leaders. One of the things, I do a lot of leadership development work around this as well, so leadership development programs around EDI, and one of the things which is really hard is often the ways of thinking, the behaviours, the practices that we've learned, which have got us to those leadership positions, are the very thoughts, actions, behaviours that we need to unlearn in order to drive EDI through the organisation. That's hard. And I think so there's something about really understanding your sector, understanding your organisational imperatives, understanding what's in it for your leaders. So if you are in that HR role and you're trying to convince people, you have to have thought all that through. That doesn't mean you go to your chief exec and says, this is what's in it for you. I don't mean that, but if you have to have done the thinking in order to frame how you approach your C-suite leaders to really bring them along the journey. And there's something really weird. When I was in my various CEO roles, and I knew I needed to connect my board to whatever it was that I was trying to achieve in that organisation or drive change, there is nothing more compelling than somebody outside of the organisation coming into the organisation to do a presentation to that board, which makes that board think, oh, that's a good idea. And even if that chief exec had said exactly the same thing, oh yeah, well, that's just the chief exec. There's something very, very odd. So there's something, if you're in an HR role, who is it that your chief exec respects, or your C-suite team respects, or your C-suite team would listen to, that you can get in front of your C-suite team so they say the messages that you would have said anyway, because it will be heard differently. So you have to think quite tactically about it as well. Again, I could talk about this for hours, but yeah, those are my starters for 10 on that topic.
Thank you, Srabani. Gosh, we could talk for longer, and I think I'm going to have to invite you to a panel event because I want to download more of what's in your brain. And I'd certainly like to download the contents of your fridge. If you've got white chocolate Kit Kats, I'm there. But we are going to have to wrap up. But there's one question I want to ask you, but you're only allowed 3-word answer. So I'm going to put you on the spot here, slightly curveball. But just to describe your leadership style in your own right, just give me 3 words. How would people describe your leadership style?
I could probably describe it in 2.
Oh, okay.
One is servant leadership. I'm not a fan of all this authentic leadership stuff. It's not about me, it's about the organisation. Servant leadership. And I think the second is contextual. You cannot be the same leader in multiple organisations because the context of each organisation is different. So you have to take from your leadership toolbox what you need to serve that particular organisation in its particular context. So servant and contextual.
Wonderful. That's a great way to end our chat today. Thank you so much for your time. I've really, really enjoyed listening to you, and I've learned a lot along the way. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. And good luck with your fantastic podcast series. Sounds like you're doing some great work.